Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoyed this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Jill Braff's medical career was going quite well. After graduating from boarding school, she took a residency and got a job as a surgeon at a local hospital. "You have golden hands," colleagues said. "In the capital, in some private clinic, you could earn a lot of money. But here, a provincial town, no prospects." Jill laughed back. "People live here too, and they need to be treated. You can't make all the money anyway. And the outlook? You never know where you'll find it, and you never know where you'll lose it." Having chosen the noble profession of physician, Jill followed in her grandmother's footsteps. Her grandmother had been a cardiologist and had saved many seemingly hopeless patients. Maria Flynn was no longer in the world, but at the district hospital, where her granddaughter now worked, she was still remembered and spoke only good words. Jill's father was a geologist. Donald Braff died up north 7 years ago. Jill's mother, Sarah Braff, worked as an elementary school teacher. After her husband's death, Sarah never married, although there were plenty of opportunities. "Apparently, I'm a one-woman woman," she said, and her daughter both envied and pitied her mother. "How nice it must be to meet a man who you love once and for all." But her mother was still young, and an attractive woman at that, and Jill would have liked to see her happy. Jill lived in the suburbs and drove to work every day, not counting weekends, of course. Jill remembered with a laugh when she came to get a job at the hospital, when she said she lived in the township. The head doctor asked, perplexed, how would Jill get to work? Apparently Zach Flynn, Jill thought with a chuckle, looking at his name tag, didn't know that shuttle buses existed. "I guess he thinks we're country folks who don't know any other kind of transportation than a horse." Anyone who lived in a village and has ever been employed in a city will confirm that city employers don't particularly like to hire people from the countryside. Ridiculous as it may seem, some of them really think that villagers use anything but private or public transportation. And who knows what fate would have befallen Jill had it not been for the head of the cardiology department. "Hello, Jill." Patricia Jenkins smiled. "Are you joining us too? Do you two know each other?" Surprised, the potential supervisor asked. "Well, Zach Flynn, I remember her from high school." His colleague smiled. "She is the granddaughter of Maria Flynn, isn't she?" Really? The woman laughed. "Well, if Jill Braff is going to be as good a doctor as her grandmother," the head doctor snickered, "I'm willing to take my chances, promise." Jill promised, and that's how she got the job at the county hospital. While at first Jill was perceived as Maria Flynn's granddaughter, over time she was noticed and distinguished among her colleagues. Jill Braff was always executive and responsible. Yes, she had to drive to work from the township, while some colleagues who lived on the next street could be late. Some of them shook their heads in horror as they imagined Jill getting up early in the morning, getting on the bus, and driving back to work after a hard day's work. That's a whole 20 kilometers. That kind of dedication is worth a lot. "Half of our village commutes to work in the city," she replied with a smile. "We certainly can't be intimidated by that. And we have no choice, we need a job. What kind of selflessness is that?" It was hard at first, and then Jill got used to it. After work, she would go to the store, buy groceries, and take the bus. It was a simple evening ritual. Sarah Braff, who, as an educator, had been given an apartment in town, had suggested more than once that her daughter move in with her. But Jill genuinely loved the countryside, the fresh air, the work in the vegetable garden, and traveling back and forth didn't seem so burdensome. What was 20 kilometers on a padded bus? It was on one of those trips that Jill met a young wheelchair-bound man who was begging at the bus station. She saw him every day and even knew the guy's name was Harry. He was pretty good looking, and Jill couldn't help but wonder. She wondered what had made him do it. Hopelessness, as we all know. Jill had noticed that Harry was a willing alms giver. One day she saw two men approach him. These two also occasionally glimpsed at the bus station and asked for alms. One was in a military uniform and with a cane, the other grimy in rags that looked less like clothes. In the hands of this creature was a child wrapped in a shabby plaid robe. Jill often wondered where the baby's mother was. She also wondered why he was always silent. Wasn't the man hanging alcohol in a bottle? "Hey, I'm talking to you." The man with the cane turned to Harry. "I'm listening." He nodded cautiously. "Not here." Harry shrugged, and they walked toward the garages across the street from the bus station. Jill didn't know what made her follow them, but something told her she should. Jill knew from the looks on their faces that it was unlikely that the boys had approached Harry with good intention. She went to the voices and, hiding behind one of the garages, listened to the conversation. Jill could literally feel it in her skin that the conversation did not bode well for Harry. "So why the hell did you beat back our client with a threat?" asked him a guy in a military uniform. "Why should I?" Harry grinned wryly. "The kind you talk at the bus station from morning till night." The smelly one intervened. "You've got the money, go home in your carriage and let the others earn it." "What are you talking to him for?" the warrior exclaimed and struck Harry with his cane. The blow hit his shoulder. Jill jumped out of her hiding place with determination, rushed at him and shouted, "Stop it." The soldier was taken aback, but instantly assessed the situation and turned his attention to Jill. But she was more nimble. She snatched the offender's cane and pointed it at him. Muddy put the roll on the ground and rushed to his friend's rescue. Jill fought off the beggars with her cane, but they would not give up. Suddenly the soldier inadvertently stepped on the parcel, which immediately responded with a puppet voice. "Mom, take me in your arms." "Idiot!" yelled the miracle in rags. "Watch where you're going." Jill looked at the bundle in confusion. The blanket was unwrapped, and a cute, pink-cheeked toy baby came out of it, and she wondered how calm the baby was. "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you," the lonely father hissed in a menacing voice, addressing Jill, and picking up the doll, he hurried after his comrade, who was already pulling him by the hand. "Are you all right?" Jill asked Harry, who was clearly uncomfortable. Although he wrinkled painfully, holding his shoulder, he nodded. "Then let's go to the train station." The boy nodded again. "How often do you have conflicts like that?" Jill asked. "No," he shrugged. Glancing at the scoreboard, Jill noted that the bus was 15 minutes away. Suddenly she realized she didn't want to part with Harry. What the hell? What if Jill could do something to help him? And if, of course, he would accept that help, too proud and independent. "Harry, do you have any relatives?" she asked. "I don't know." The boy shook his head. "I'm an orphan," he answered. "Why do you ask?" "But is there really no one to help you?" A young man. Harry frowned. He'd just been discharged from the hospital, and the words of the trauma doctor were still fresh in his mind. "I'm sorry, but you will not be able to walk. But if you do decide to fight for your health, you need to go to the city, or even better, to Germany or Israel. They do such operations, but we, alas, are not magicians. Although the nerve endings are functioning, we still cannot help you. We are just a district hospital." The words sounded like mockery. But where would an orphan student get the money for an operation in Germany, Israel, or America? But should the doctor be offended? She was only outlining the state of affairs. So Harry had no choice but to thank the doctor. "I'm sorry. I must have said something wrong." Jill was embarrassed, noticing the depressed look on Harry's face. "It's okay," he waved his hand. "Are you sure?" "Yes, of course." The boarding to the village was announced. "I have to go," Jill smiled awkwardly. "I'll see you later." She got on the bus. Looking out the window, Jill saw Harry on the platform. The guy was smiling demurely, and when the bus moved, he seemed to wave shyly at Jill. The bus disappeared from view, and Harry rolled toward home, remembering his life along the way. He had once been a determined, hard-working boy. After graduating from the orphanage, Harry had studied architecture in construction college by correspondence and worked in construction. Girls liked him. He was into sports, loved fishing and camping. Harry had grand plans for his life, but they were cut short by an industrial accident. Harry badly injured his back, leaving him paralyzed. He was, of course, paid some pennies in compensation, but that was only enough for meager sustenance and inexpensive painkillers. For him, a young and healthy boy, it was a real tragedy. An unwanted orphan and an invalid, that's what he was. The outlook was not good, the hopelessness was overwhelming. Is this really the end? Discharged from the hospital in a wheelchair, Harry was discouraged. He returned to the apartment he had been assigned as an orphan and suddenly realized that the place seemed foreign to him. Everything was alien. On reflection, Harry realized that there was nothing surprising about that. Since he had left the apartment healthy and cheerful and full of optimism, and returned crippled, there was his bed. Harry ran his hand over his favorite rhombus plate and immediately yanked it back. The bed seemed awfully cold, and here was the photo album. He knew he would never look at those pictures again, because in them he was healthy, cheerful, and most importantly, he was walking, and not only walking, dancing heartily at parties and nightclubs. And this was his favorite chair, only now he didn't need it. Sometimes Harry was visited by his orphanage buddies and college classmates. Everyone tried to cheer him up as best they could, but they knew it was all pointless. Some advice on how to go on, however, was given. The only pity was that it was all useless. Former classmate Robert advised Harry to study online and then find some remote work. And why not? He thought excitedly. Maybe I will become a programmer or learn another modern profession. In short, Harry followed the advice of his companion, but in reality, it was not so easy. Normal courses, where you can really learn something, cost a lot of money, which Harry simply did not have. So he decided to take another route, to find a remote job without any courses. Fortunately, Harry had seen plenty of such ads. He reasonably thought that among the variety of proposals he could find a suitable option, but there were indeed many vacancies. But they were, as a rule, network marketing, pyramid schemes, or nothing at all. And is this lauded online earning even possible? Harry thought to himself. Or are those who supposedly earn good money on it blatant liars? Once he found an ad for a construction company requiring a dispatcher to work from home. Harry decided that here was his chance. Laptop and phone, thank God, available. Plus, he went to the College of Architecture and Civil Engineering. All in all, not the worst option for a construction company. Harry made an appointment for an interview, and another pleasant surprise awaited him, as it turned out that the firm's office was quite close to where he lived. You should have seen the way the manager looked at him. It was a sticky mixture of pity, condescension, and squeamishness. You know that dispatches work around the clock, because drivers are on the line 24 hours a day, and at any time there can be a breakdown and other unpleasant thing. What's the problem? Harry frowned perplexedly. I'm, home most of the time, and this job is one of the few options I have. What if something happens to you? Anything that could happen to me has already happened, Harry grinned incredulously. And I need a job, is that too much to ask? No, but you. The girl unabashedly nodded at Harry's stroller, and he continued, I am an invalid, you mean? Notice that you said that. The girl made a stern grimace. Goodbye, he said, and turned and headed for the door. Harry rolled down the corridor, and everyone looked behind him. Kindergarten friends advised him not to give up, but that's easy to say for someone who walks and runs and jumps. Nevertheless, there was still hope in his soul. Indeed, just because he was actually turned down by one organization didn't mean the same would be true of another. But Harry visited 4 more offices with the same result. However, Krista's classmate, whose fiancé worked as an admissions manager, explained that it wasn't necessarily about disability. After all, there are plenty of applicants, and the place is just one. This was reassuring, but Harry never found a job. Old friends began to remind him less and less frequently. Harry began to lose heart and collapsed after returning from yet another unsuccessful job interview. Harry suddenly felt an acute desire for a drink. Hoping to find money, he searched every pocket and drawer of his desk. Eventually, Harry scraped together enough money that he could not only get drunk, but survive for a week. Except what would happen then? With a sigh, he thought. The thought made him feel sick, and he headed for the store, trying not to pay attention to the sympathetic looks of the sales clerk and his acquaintances. Harry took a bottle of liquor and a meager snack. In the morning, he went out on the balcony and enjoyed breathing in the aroma of his hometown. The rush of fresh air suddenly made him feel dizzy, and Harry grimaced. "What? Does your head hurt?" asked with a chuckle the neighbor who lived in the adjoining apartment. But in the next doorway, I think his name was Anthony. "There's a little bit," Harry nodded. "So this case needs to be fixed. Why don't we cooperate?" And they cooperated on a bottle, then on another. And when the third bottle arrived, there were suddenly some suspicious-looking people in the apartment, but Harry didn't care. The company of new friends was easy and fun, and they advised Harry to go fishing. As it turned out, Stan and Jimmy had a buddy who had beggars working under him. Some really did have problems in their lives or physical injuries, while others were quite healthy, just didn't like to work. This buddy, whose name no one knew, bought a laptop from Harry for next to nothing. The guy didn't care what it was for. The gadget reminded him of his unfulfilled hopes to start a new life, albeit as a person with disabilities. During the daytime, Harry was working at the bus station, and in the evenings there was smoke in his apartment. After a day's work, he'd buy liquor. Anthony, Stan, and Jimmy didn't come empty-handed either. "Harry, don't you want to trade your crib?" Jimmy asked me once. "I hadn't thought about it," he answered. "Think about it. What do you need such a mansion for a loan?" "So much for the mansion," Harry laughed. "But some families live in one," Anthony pointed out. Harry sighed bitterly. "Family. He'll probably never see that again. Who'd want an invalid begging?" "That's true. What's he need a two-roomer for now?" "I'd say it's pretty roomy, actually." "Think about it," Jimmy developed the theme. "I can even give you the coordinates of knowledgeable people. If you do it right, in addition to a comfortable bedroom in a good neighborhood, you'll also get some good money." "I wonder," Harry wondered. "Aren't those too many people in the know?" "They've got their hands all over the place, though, on the other hand. What's so surprising? It's just that people know how to get around and make useful acquaintances." "I guess so," Harry nodded. "I'll think about it." The next couple of days, his friends didn't show up, and he forgot about the tempting offer. And on the third day, Harry met Jill. Yeah, nothing to say. A pretty girl, he thought, looking at the slender girl with the kind smile, her silky blonde hair in a beautiful knot, revealing a pretty and lovely face. The girl's eyes reminded Harry of two lakes, clear and serene, and her lips plump and sensual and without a hint of silicone, like the glamorous dolls he saw near the boutiques and beauty salons he happened to drive by. Harry didn't know much about it, but he'd learned how to tell the difference between natural lips and pouty ones. Harry was by no means a chaste lad. When he was in technical school, he had a lot of acquaintances. Yet he was a handsome young man and led an active lifestyle. All the girls Harry dealt with were loose, relaxed, noisy, party people, drunks and smokers. They were fun to be with, but that was all. Jill was different. A girl like Jill you wanted to protect and carefully carry through life. But Harry couldn't do that, alas. The day he met Jill for the first time in days, he didn't feel like getting drunk. And if he thought of her, let his mind not be clouded by alcohol. Anthony called, "Harry, why don't we think about it?" A neighbor suggested. No, not today. I don't feel well. Suit yourself. Harry was relieved that Anthony didn't insist. When Jill got home, her mother Sarah called her. Daughter, we need to have a serious talk. It turns out that the mother has a man and she doesn't know how to tell her daughter. Silly girl. I feel like Jill is the mother, not the other way around. What kind of men? Come on, Mom, tell me, she encouraged me. Sarah, reassured by her daughter's words, told. It turns out that 2 weeks ago she was tracked down on social media by her high school admirer, Paul. They texted, told each other about how life turned out and eventually decided to meet, and then again. He's a widower, too, and he wants to live with me, she told her daughter. I don't even know what to say. Well, Mommy, Jill laughed. I'll tell you what. Listen to your heart. That's the way the heart is silent. Mother sighed. It'll never be the same with Daddy. And you still want a woman's happiness, said Jill. So is it worth giving it up? And also, I really want to meet him. Really? She didn't tell her acquaintance with Harry. What's there to talk about? Well, she saved an invalid from the competition. And then what? I mean, they barely spoke. But why can't Jill get him out of her head? Well, he's a good-looking guy who may well have had success with the opposite sex before his disability and begging. And why not? It's very possible Harry has some sort of education. If the faces of the supposed warrior with the crutch and the muddler with the poodle are unencumbered by intelligence, in Harry's case it's exactly the opposite. It was the look of a not stupid and judicious man. Jill had seen many active, energetic, and successful people in the past who had been broken by life's troubles while working at the hospital. In fact, most of them were men. And no wonder women tend to have more incentive to fight for existence, most often children. Jill decided that she would definitely get to know this guy, and then God willing. The next day, when Jill arrived at the bus station laden with grocery bags, Harry raised his hand in greeting and smiled. She nodded back and entered the waiting room. Seeing a woman who lived in the same township, Jill said, I'll be right with you. Let the bag stay here, okay? What conversation? And Jill headed toward Harry. Good evening. How are you? It's all right, he answered discreetly. She wanted to ask if the competition was bothering her, but something told her not to ask. She suggested that Harry go to the cafe, but he declined. What an idiot I am. Jill scolded herself on the bus. An idiot. He was embarrassed that he was in a wheelchair and I was on my own. Jill had got it right, and Harry really was embarrassed to show up at the cafe with a girl. And not just because he's disabled. The workers in all the nearby stores and canteens knew what Harry did for a living, and God forbid they should think he was trying to steal from Jill for a tasty dinner. There's more than enough of them among the beggars. Take an army man or a lonely father. For them to pull off something like that would be like saying good morning. Harry imagined how he, not being disabled, would take that Russian-haired nymph to a cafe or a restaurant. No, better not to think about it. What's the use? Still, they became friends. Every time Jill came to the bus station after work, the young people talked a lot. Harry told Jill about how he had become disabled. With each passing day, both realized that their views on life were much the same. One Friday, on a sudden impulse, Jill invited Harry to visit. Why would that be? He was surprised. Well, I just wanted to invite you to visit from the bottom of my heart, and I realized that I would love to have you as my guest. That's fine, and Jill also really wanted to introduce her friend to her mother, who was visiting. She understood, upon learning, that there was to be an introduction to her mother. Harry would probably refuse, so she preferred to keep quiet about it. On the bus, the villagers looked at Harry curiously. They wondered what a young, beautiful, intelligent woman could have in common with a railway station beggar. Jill guessed what they were thinking. She didn't care. She liked the man, who was clearly not in it for the good life, and Jill didn't care what her fellow villagers thought. Besides, Sarah liked her guest. He's a good fellow, she whispered to her daughter. She whispered to her daughter as they went into the kitchen to place the roast chicken on a plate and slice more bread. "A very good one," Jill responded with a fervor. "Only he was unlucky." "Who knows?" Sarah smiled slyly. Harry left the next day on the evening train. Not only was it more comfortable for the invalid, but he was too uncomfortable for the invalid, and he was too uncomfortable to feel the prying eyes of the villagers on him. After that memorable dinner, Harry began to visit Jill regularly. While she was at work, the boy helped his friend around the house as best he could, dusting, cooking simple but very tasty dishes, as he called them from the bachelor kitchen, watering the houseplants, and working in the vegetable garden. And Harry refused money for his help, but Jill gave him groceries from the vegetable garden and some other food. Anyway, the begging was over, and sometimes Harry even stayed overnight at her place. Jill guessed that the local cuckoos were starting to gossip about them, but that certainly didn't bother her. Their relationship was platonic, and someone's fantasies were definitely not from a great mind. People generally like to believe in things that stirred the imagination. Once Harry watered a cucumber, an activity that had a calming effect on him. Even as a child, when he and the rest of the orphanage children used to water the vegetable garden, imagining that the plant was giving them chewy moisture, it always made Harry feel happy, even though he hadn't done it in years. The boy had the same feeling now as he had then at the orphanage. Suddenly, he heard a woman's voice. "Hello, and who would you be?" The guy shrugged his shoulders with a smile. "I'm a friend of Jill's. My name is Harry, and I'm Mrs. Valerie. It's a pleasure. Let's meet each other." "I'm sorry, indiscreet question. Are you just a friend of Jill's?" "Just a friend," Harry confirmed. And thinking to himself, what does she want? What difference does it make, friend or no friend? Though older people are generally nosy. "Harry, I'm sorry. It's just that this girl is very dear to me. I wouldn't want you to hurt her." "Understood," he nodded and went into the house. In 10 minutes, Mrs. Valerie was already there, and not empty-handed, but with a pie that exuded a delicious aroma. Well, Harry would have loved to have eaten, but he didn't have time to prepare anything. "Harry, I made a pie, but it's too much. Would you like some?" "I won't say no." Tea. Over tea and cake, the chatty woman told him the story of Jill's life. Turns out she had been married and her husband had left her. Well, it's a mundane affair. True, Harry sincerely did not understand how he could leave such a girl. Besides, he took it to heart that Jill was pregnant and had lost the baby. The term was already long enough that she knew she could have had a son. The husband was a bastard, Mrs. Valerie shook her head. He cheated on Jill left and right, and in the end he went off with her friend, so you can't hurt her. Harry was far from being offended by Jill, so he readily replied about it. "Don't worry, I won't hurt you. We're not a couple, you know. I'm handicapped, Jill's normal. I just help her, and she's nice to me. There's nothing like that between us." Mrs. Valerie looked at Harry slyly but said nothing. She was clearly thinking about something of her own. In the morning, Harry and Jill left for town. No new friends showed up, and Harry didn't crave their company, and something told him to stay away from the bunch. But, as the saying goes, don't take chances. A couple of days later, when Harry drove up to the driveway, all his friends were waiting for him. "How about it? Shall we go out?" Anthony asked cheerfully. Frankly, Harry was bored, so he agreed. The guys drank and talked about everything and nothing, and suddenly the drinking buddies returned to talking about the apartment. I must say, Harry had forgotten to even think about it. Then he decided that it was just a normal drunken conversation that was silly to take seriously. Besides, after Mrs. Valerie's story, all Harry's thoughts were of Jill. The buddies were insistent, and Harry, though drunk, couldn't help but realize that it was for a reason. For what it's worth, orphans had the intuition of a good hunting dog. He promised to think again, but this time he was answered, "Come on, just think fast," and noticing the wary look on Harry's face. Jimmy added that the number of options was limited, and while he was thinking, he would miss a great opportunity. It seemed to make sense, but it was like a veil had fallen from the guy's eyes. Harry was horrified to realize what he'd gotten himself into. He had to get out of their sight, or he'd be in trouble. "Jill, I need to have a serious talk with you," Harry said. When he arrived at her place the next day, he told her about his relationship with the suspicious trio, and the girl suggested that Harry move in with her. "It's easier that way anyway," Jill said. "I don't know about you, but I feel like you've become like family to me or something. I'm sad to be alone. My mother, I feel, cannot live here after my father's death. She visits me, of course, though." Harry didn't feel comfortable embarrassing the girl, which is what he told her. But Jill just laughed. "Now, my mother has a long-time boyfriend. I don't think she's going to be able to travel now, so you're not embarrassing me." There you go. Jill was relieved, she thought for sure. After settling in the village, Harry loved the village as much as Jill loved it. The silence, the fresh air, and the intoxicating sense of nature had a calming effect on him. How I hadn't paid attention to it before when I came here to visit, the boy wondered. The people who had initially regarded Harry with suspicion grew to like the handsome brunette, and he, too, liked the simple-hearted, ingenuous villagers. Everyone in the neighborhood tried to do nice things for them. Varvara, an elderly and stern-looking, but in fact the kindest of souls, brought Jill and Harry milk, homemade sour cream, cottage cheese, and cheese. After tasting soup with homemade sour cream, Harry decided that he had never eaten anything more delicious in his life. Mrs. Valerie, who lived next door, invited the young people almost every day to taste homemade pastries or delicious roasts, which she was a great, masterful cook. Soon there was another tenant in Jill's cozy cabin. Jill and Harry loved to take walks in the woods. In the summer, they picked raspberries, strawberries, and flowers. And when autumn came, they began going for mushrooms. And Jill adored collecting oak leaves, and Drill adored collecting oak leaves, from which she made lovely autumn bouquets. On this similar September day, as the young people approached the village, another discovery awaited them. Someone seems to be squeaking. Jill said somewhere near the garbage cans they went to the voice and saw a palm-colored puppy, all covered in dirt. It must have been thrown away, she surmised. A lot of people from the city come here and throw away kittens and puppies. It's a pity about the little guy. That's right, Harry agreed, and the dog is beautiful. Very beautiful. The dog turned out to be a boy. Harry suggested that he be named Hussar. "Why, I like it," Jill exclaimed and turned to the puppy. "Hello, Hussar. Will you come live with us?" The puppy trustingly bumped into Jill's chest. It was just an indescribable feeling, like a baby. They came home and gave the baby some steamed milk, which neighbor Eliza brought. After getting drunk, the baby fell asleep on a piece of sheepskin that Jill had found in the pantry. Harry decided to snooze, too. He generally liked to sleep after his walks, and Jill began to prepare dinner. Suddenly, the young woman caught herself thinking that they looked like a real family. Jill, Harry, and Hussar. Silly, of course, she thought. But how nice was that? Harry and Jill wondered what breed it was by its long, powerful paws. They knew the dog would grow big, and when the Hussar grew up, Harry assumed that it was a crossbreed. It looked like an alibi, he said thoughtfully, but clearly not purebred. But what breed he was mixed with, that I do not understand. Maybe with a German Shepherd? Who cares? Jill exclaimed. What matters is that we love him. Hussar was as big as a calf. Not a day went by without the little fellow. Half-breed was happily sneezing and wrinkling his nose in the winter woods, swallowing the snow that fell on him from the trees. And then one day, Jill awoke to someone roughly grabbing her by the hair, and when she finally woke up, she squealed in horror. Some man in a bandana wrapped his hair around her arm and held a knife to her throat. "Where is the gold?" asked the intruder. He finally gave up hope that Jill was dreaming. What gold? Gritting her teeth in fear, she asked. But her fear turned into sheer terror when a second voice answered. Don't play dumb with me. What gold? Your daddy's. And a man in a cowboy hat came up to Jill. I wonder how they got here, she thought. And how did they get past Hussar? Oh boy, suddenly we don't have any gold. Dad was a simple geologist, went on expeditions. That's right, answered the first one. He stumbled upon a gold mine during one of his expeditions. My father died 7 years ago, and I have not heard of any gold mine, but the robbers, judging by their incredulous smirks, were clearly not satisfied with such an answer. Fatty! Shouted the guy in the bandana. It's all clear in there. A third voice came from the room where Harry slept. A man of some kind. What do we do with him? Jill panicked again. How many of them are there? Harry's completely defenseless. And I'm not much of a fighter. There was a sniffling sound from the window and some kind of commotion. The landlady was no sooner frightened than Hussar appeared in the bedroom. He approached the robbers and with a threatening growl began to tread upon them. Good doggy. Cowboy Hat said ingratiatingly. Handsome, but Hussar did not take such coarse flattery and barked warningly. Maybe the doggy should be consumed. A voice suggested from the kitchen. Apparently, he was the fat man who had entered Harry's room. Are you an idiot or what? Shouted the man in the bandana. Let's get out of here. He's going to blow the whole neighborhood to smithereens. The burglars tried to climb out the window, but it was no use. It turned out that the neighbors had already rushed to the noise, and the police car had definitively ruined the robbers' chances of escape. Hands on the hood, shouted one of the policemen. The cops questioned the occupants of the house and, after saying a few words of approval for Hussar, drove off. Jill still couldn't get over her fear. Shaking me, she said. I can't imagine what kind of gold it is. Is that possible? Harry asked. Who knows? Dad was a geologist and could have found anything, but hiding it somewhere in the house was wild. How about some tea? I couldn't sleep anyway. What time is it, by the way? 4th hour. Wow, it's almost time to get up. After drinking her tea, Jill lay in bed and began to wonder if what the intruders had said might be true. But when she didn't think of anything, she drifted off to sleep. Soon Jill found out the answer to her question. A few days later, she received a police summons. That's when Jill realized that the burglars were none other than her father's former colleagues, Steve Miller, John Rise, and Bill Lawrence. Have you heard of them? Asked investigator Sam Cope. No, never, she answered. Yes, Dad never gave the names of his colleagues. Well, maybe he was friends with someone who came to your house. No, it's nothing like that. I see. Let's be clear, Donald Braff, your father. Yes, that's right. He died 7 years ago on an expedition. Did you know that your father was not exactly a simple geologist? The investigator looked at Jill so intently that she felt as if he suspected her of something. But why should she be afraid? After all, Jill really didn't know anything. I wondered if her mother knew. She thought and asked the investigator, What do you mean, not exactly simple? The answer made Jill open her mouth in amazement. Turns out Donald Braff worked for a private company that was only interested in gold. There he was, looking for deposits for honest gold mines. And what can I say? Her parent was indeed a very peculiar geologist. But that was just the beginning. Then, 7 years ago, Donald Braff and his colleagues stumbled upon a veritable gold mine. Man, I think we've stumbled onto something we need, John exclaimed. Oh, wow. Donald rounded his eyes. Those are nuggets. I've never seen so many in my dreams. The 4 men stood near the gold deposit. The yellow metallic sheen tickled not only the eyes but also the nerves. Each thought of a new car. The other already saw himself in a new house away from the hated mother-in-law. A third thought he would finally get teeth and pay off a hefty debt, and a fourth, Donald Braff, was determined to give his only daughter a fancy wedding. Each of them had their own dreams, but all 4 of them had a bad idea. The amount of wealth was driving everyone crazy, Stan said with a chuckle. Nuggets one by one, treasures. That would drive anybody crazy. The geologists collected the gold and stored it in a hut that served as their hiding place. And sometime later, Donald Braff was killed crossing the river. The associates, who actually went to Jill's house, went to Donald Braff's stash, but no gold was found. It makes perfect sense that Braff had stashed it, that is, taken it home, if home, of course, but there were no other option. They certainly hadn't given up hope of finding a new gold mine, the investigator continued. But 7 years of searching were in vain, so they decided to try their luck at my house, and if they were lucky enough to get Daddy's gold. Jill prompted. Quite right, Cope nodded. Then they realized that your father probably didn't tell you anything, didn't have time or just didn't want to, in the hope of turning the gold into money and make the family happy. Jill didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Left without a head of the family, she and her mother were not paupers, but they did not luxuriate. They had everything they needed for a normal life, and they never dreamed of being rich. But what if there really was gold in the house? The girl mentally clutched her head. God, yes, if there really was. Jill could help Harry with the operation, for that was the most important thing to her. Hush, she reasoned to herself. Why dream in vain? The greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. It was like a detective, she said. And life is not that kind of detective, philosophically remarked the investigator. Can you please tell me if this gold, if it exists in nature, is realistic to find? Well, maybe with a dog or something. There's nothing easier, Cope smiled. They use a metal detector for that. In the end, the gold in the house was indeed found. The metal detector responded to the kitchen wall. Well, congratulations, Cope said. I hope you remember that the law says the state gets most of it. Yes, of course, answered Jill. Her soul sang. Even with a portion of the value of the gold they found going to the home state, they would still have a lot of money on hand. Whether there was anything left over didn't worry her too much. I don't care. I'll earn it. Jill had a job. God willing, Harry would start earning. The young people sat on the terrace and, armed with a tablet, monitored foreign clinics for the cost of the surgeries Harry needed. Hussar fidgeted beside her. My good boy, Jill smiled, reaching out her hand to her pet. The dog reached out to his mistress with his eyes closed. So big, so brave, he reminded her of a big baby. There's that, Harry smiled. After getting a portion of his favorite peanut, Hussar laid down next to him, while Harry and Jill continued their business. Finally, after studying a dozen proposals, they settled on a prestigious German clinic. The reviews seemed convincing, and 2 weeks later the young people flew to Munich. They were seen off by everyone around them. God bless you on the road, Mrs. Valerie said, wiping away her tears. And of course, a speedy recovery to Harry. And I'll take care of Hussar. Take care of him, Jill smiled. Her eyes moistened suspiciously, too. He is our protector. You don't even have to worry about that. Oh, I can't stand you girls, Mrs. Margaret exclaimed. It's such a joy, and you're getting damp. So these are tears of joy, said Jill. I'll pray for Harry's health, said Sarah Braff, who also came to see them off with Paul. The man shook Harry's hand and said, hang in there, boy. We're all with you. Before a cab pulled up behind Harry and Jill, each attendant had time to say a few kind words. Everyone who lived near them had had time to fall in love with this amazing couple and their fearless four-legged friend. And, of course, they all sincerely wished that Harry would start walking. To tell you the truth, they were both a little afraid that something might go wrong, and Harry would remain a wheelchair-bound invalid. Even if it did, Jill thought, as the plane gained altitude, I would love Harry more than life. Needless to say what was going on in the boy's soul. But their fears were all in vain. On the day of the operation, everything fell apart for Jill. It feels like you're the one who's going to be operated on. Harry laughed. Before the operation, He had to undergo a full examination, and Jill accompanied her beloved to all the offices. The German doctors looked at them with a look of amusement. And so the operation was successful. The young interpreter said with a smile, "There is still rehabilitation to be done, but the worst is over. Soon your spouse will not only be able to walk, but also to dance." "He's not my spouse." Jill smiled through her tears. "I hope not yet." The interpreter said something to the doctor, who answered in English. "I wish you happiness." "Take care of Harry." Jill rushed to hug the man who, judging by patient reviews, had put a single invalid on his feet. "Danke." With feeling, she said, one of the few German words she knew. Wilhelm Miller patted Jill on the shoulder and went to his office. "How great it is here," Harry said. "I wouldn't go anywhere." They were sitting on a bench in the courtyard of the clinic, which looked like a fancy hotel. There were roses of all varieties of the most incredible flowers, lilies, thuas, and other incredible plants whose names they did not know, and there was a small ornamental pond with a fountain. Listening to the cheerful murmuring, they wanted to think only good thoughts. It seemed to Jill that they were in paradise, but not in the courtyard of the Munich clinic. "And home?" she teased Harry. "Well, that's for sure, but I would have stayed here for a while." "It's all clear with you," laughed Jill. "Jill, marry me." The girl looked at Harry in amazement. "Marriage?" "Yeah, I'm sorry about the ring. And of course I have to get back on my feet. But I swear you won't regret it. I promise to be a good husband." Jill wondered more than once how Harry felt about her. For herself, she had figured it out long ago. Jill had fallen in love with Harry since the day she had wrestled him away from his rival beggars. What she had at first mistaken for sympathy and a desire to help her neighbor turned out to be love. "And Harry. Sorry, I got off on the wrong foot," he continued. "Jill, I've loved you for a long time. I fell in love with you back when you desperately rushed to save me. Remember?" She nodded with a smile. "So what's your answer?" "Yes, of course I did." Returning to their native country, already bride and groom, Jill and Harry made plans for their lives all along the way. They decided to live in the village, upgrade the house, have at least 3 children, and buy a van to take the whole family on picnics. The young people drove to the registry office straight from the airport. When the employee saw them off, she thought it was obvious that these two were marrying for love. "Jill, remember that time at the bus station when you suggested I go to the cafe?" Harry suddenly asked. "Well, I remember," Jill shrugged. "So, Harry, yeah, I figured it out right away." "Let's not talk about the bad stuff," he smiled. "I'm in a positive frame of mind right now. Now I want to invite you to a cafe. Let's celebrate, so to speak, the filing of the application." "Aren't you tired?" Jill asked worriedly. "You haven't been walking that long and you're putting so much stress on your legs. Listen to me. I am your doctor after all." Harry walked with his wand and looked pretty good, but Jill knew that the euphoria of his newfound musculoskeletal activity could backfire on him. "Oh, come on," Harry brushed it off. "You can do it once, and until the wedding, I solemnly swear to be on bed rest." "Look at me," she jokingly wagged her finger. "I'll take you up on that." The future spouses went to the nearest cafe, and having bought a bunch of different food and a bottle of champagne, celebrated the filing of the application. Tiredness took its toll, and the bride and groom called a cab to the cafe and drove to the village. When Mrs. Valerie saw the car, she spluttered, "Hussar, yours are back. Well, home, eh?" The dog whimpered and wagged his tail. He had realized by now that his beloved masters were back. As soon as Harry and Jill paid the driver and got out of the car, the hussar broke free from his neighbor's arms and took turns licking his owners. "Hussar," Jill exclaimed. "My boy, how I've missed you." "He's a handsome boy," Harry said, patting his pet on the scruff of the neck. After thanking the kind neighbor and promising to come back later, the young people went inside. They chatted with their pet, fed him some goodies, and then the 3 of them took a siesta. Sarah Braff woke up with the feeling that something good was going to happen today. As she hummed, she prepared a sumptuous breakfast and set the table. "Wow!" Paul exclaimed, waking up to the overpowering aromas. "What's the occasion for such a feast?" At this early hour, the children applied. The woman smiled happily. "Right from the airport to the registry office? Can you imagine? It's quick. I can't tell you anything. Youth. Well, what are we waiting for?" Paul had talked about legalizing the relationship more than once, and Sarah was pleased with that attitude. But she herself didn't care for the formality. Paul and Sarah had no children together, and they had their own place to live. They lived in Paul's apartment, and Sarah's place was rented. She was happy with her longtime admirer. At times it seemed to Sarah that she loved him. Donald was long gone. She wasn't old yet, so why shouldn't she really be happy? Not as a person, not as a mother, but as a woman. "Paul, you have my word. We'll definitely come back to this conversation," Sarah said. "But let me be happy for my daughter." "All right, whatever you say. And tomorrow you and I are invited to an engagement party." "Well, that's a good thing." In the evening, the future spouses were watching television when they began to show a crime newsreel. Harry suddenly said, "Turn it up." "What's the matter?" worried Jill. All the familiar faces muttered the lover and the house. Someone was being carried out of the house where Harry lived in a black bag. He might not have guessed which of his former neighbors had left the world had he not been shown two of the detainees, Stan and Jimmy. After listening to the report, Harry was convinced his guess was correct. It turned out that Anthony and Jimmy were black realtors, and that Anthony was targeting at risk alcoholics, drug addicts, the disabled, the lonely, the elderly, and other poor people who were overboard or on the verge of being overboard. As it turned out, the victim of Stan and Jimmy was Anthony, though it wasn't hard to guess. I wondered what he had done to them. Did Harry think, or did he refuse to cooperate? I didn't care as long as God got me away from them. And, as it turned out, just in time. "These are the ones, aren't they?" Jill asked. Harry nodded and switched the program firmly. "I don't want to hear about them. I have a different life now." Jill squeezed his hand cheerfully and mentally swore, "I'll do anything to make Harry forget what happened to him after his accident." For the engagement party, besides Sarah and Paul, they invited some of the neighbors and a couple of Jill's friends with whom she worked together, Stephanie the nurse and Casey the orthopedist. The girls looked at the groom with approval, and each thought happiness had finally arrived. Jill, of all people, deserved it. They knew all too well how Jill's first marriage had ended, and they all hoped it would be different with this handsome young man. The weather was gorgeous, so the table was set in the courtyard. Tables and chairs were assembled from all over the world, and guests also brought pickles, jams, pies, and other goodies. Harry was reminded of old movies about the countryside, and he chuckled. But by the way, he liked it a lot. It all looked very heartwarming family. Like he was a man who had no family and in fact had never known home comfort. He could not help but appreciate it. The hussar was hovering around, but nobody was afraid of him. Everyone knew this big-hearted man to be good-natured and yet ruthless to those who came to them with bad intentions, like those three. The dog was in a good-natured mood. His canine instincts told him that now the owners would always be together. Preparations for the wedding were in full swing, and the bride and groom were planning a large-scale celebration. They had already decided that they would have their wedding in the village. Could it have been otherwise? "How nice that," said Harry, as Jill entered the kitchen to check on the cabbage pie. The groom sat in his chair, happily stretching out his legs and wiggling his toes. Crazy. It wasn't long ago that he couldn't do that. "Okay," agreed the bride. "Do you want it to be even better?" "What can you do for me?" he asked. Jill ran into the room and returned clutching something in her hand. "What's in there?" "And guess which hand?" She smiled slyly. When Harry guessed the first time, he saw a small piece of paper with 2 red stripes on it. "Jill, what's the deal with the pie?" Sarah asked, The woman's gaze fell on a piece of paper. Pregnant. A mischievous light flickered in Sarah's eyes. Well, you can see for yourself. Jill, are you serious? Harry exclaimed. It's true. The three of us are going to get married. The four of us you forgot who saw. Harry and Jill's wedding day was clear and sunny. The air smelled of flowers, of grass clippings. There were no salads and other obligatory wedding trappings, but obligatory ones. And it wasn't that the bride and groom had lived together for a year and were expecting their firstborn. It's just that they've experienced more together in that year than most longtime spouses haven't. But most importantly, Harry and Jill healed their wounded souls and each other's hearts and gave each of their halves back a taste of life. The wedding was celebrated in the village, as planned. But first, as usual, there was a registration. The groom was already moving freely without a stick, and in general was recovering by leaps and bounds. Whatever you say, this Miller is a real wizard, they said. And now, thanks to this comical-looking man with golden hands, Harry will be able to dance the wedding waltz with his wife. I must say, in a dark grey wedding suit with a pink boutonniere, the groom looked incredibly imposing. Jill was chic too. She deliberately didn't buy the puffy white dress with ruffles and rhinestones. It was too reminiscent of her ridiculous first marriage. A cream satin dress with a high waist and thin straps effectively emphasized her shape and hid the interesting situation. Jill wore her luxurious blonde hair in a high, intricate hairdo and adorned it with fresh white flowers. How beautiful you are, Harry said fondly, just like a fairy tale princess. You're not so bad yourself, the wife replied flirtatiously, and when she heard the car pull up to the house, she solemnly announced, "And here is our carriage." For the trip to the registry office, the lovers ordered a limousine. It's a party. Everyone who was present at the engagement party and some of Harry's friends from the orphanage were invited to the wedding. Well done, Harry, Robert said approvingly. You've got yourself such a pretty girl. I know, the groom answered in a satisfied voice. And he added seriously, but my Jill isn't just beautiful. She's my guardian angel. You wouldn't believe where she got me out of, and it's better not to know. The couple's love story turned out to be an enduring one. The toastmaster spoke poignantly, and a couple of hours later, as the newlyweds and guests sat at the long tables in the courtyard, the young, elegant guy talked about how this couple's love was real, for it had gone through many trials. The guests listened to the young man, and each thought of his own. Harry's orphanage friends remembered the reckless heartbreaker Harry had been before his accident, and noted how he had changed, his eyes different. They were now the eyes of an unfunny boy, the darling of the girls, and of a man who had been through a great ordeal. Jill's friends admired this remarkable young woman who had endured many hardships. Mrs. Valerie's neighbor recalled a wheelchair user watering cucumbers a year ago, whom she had told about Jill's life. He really didn't hurt, did he? The old woman thought. The main thing was to keep it that way. It would be a shame if they didn't make a great couple. Paul thought about the fact that thanks to Sarah he had met these wonderful young people. Their love story shook Paul to the core. Finally, my girl is happy, Sarah thought. The main thing was that she and Harry would carry this love through to the end. She remembered her first son-in-law who had permanently deprived Jill of faith in love and trust in men. For several years, Jill let no one into her heart, and only a station house beggar managed to light the fire of love in her. But no matter what anyone thought, all these men undoubtedly wished them marital happiness and strong, sincere love. Harry looked adoringly at his young wife and wondered what would have happened to him if he hadn't met Jill. Certainly nothing good, the newlywed concluded. And Jill suddenly thought of her father. Dad had always been caring and generous to his girls, as he called his wife and daughter. But Donald Braff had no idea what a royal gift Jill would receive 7 years after his death, and not just to Jill, but to his son-in-law, even if he had done such an ugly thing. The girl looked up into the blue July sky. Who knows? What if Donald Braff is looking at his daughter, and rejoices heartily at how much happiness the gold hidden in the kitchen wall has brought her. "Happiness to you," someone shouted. Now their hearts were beating in unison, and not just their hearts, but also their thoughts. "I love you." They both said it at the same time and laughed. God grant such harmony in everything throughout their family life, Sarah said with feeling. Happiness to you, my dear children. If you liked the story, please support me with the thumbs up button. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel, like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.